And hello again, YouTube. This is Thomas Judge back once again with another video in my series, Popular Comics It's Okay Not to Like. Now, before we begin, I want to stress again that this isn't a hate video. It's not designed to be clickbait or to cause a huge amount of controversy. Instead, this video exists because I want to challenge the echo chamber effect I see in a lot of YouTube podcasts and shows. You know the ones I mean. The ones where people talk about the top 10 essential comics you need to own, or the critical comics that every comic fan needs to have in their collection. As a comic collector of several years standing, I want to challenge some of the assumptions that underlie that thinking and, if anything, empower fans of the comic medium, both new and old, to be able to fight against that online echo chamber if they want. As a new entrant to the world of comics, it's easy to get disheartened if you read a comic everyone is raving about and don't like it. You may think that comics aren't for you. Well, I'd like to show you that you don't have to agree with the peer pressure if you don't want to. And to that end, I'm going to be talking about popular comics here that you may not have the confidence yet to admit that you don't like. Remember, there's no comic that is essential to a collection or that anyone has to own to prove their comic credentials. It is, and always will be, a matter of personal taste. You're collecting for yourself and no one else. So with no further ado, today's comic is the landmark publication MAUS, spelt M-A-U-S. Written by and illustrated by Art Spiegelman, MAUS was published from 1980 to 1991. It's often considered to be one of the big three comics from the 1980s, alongside Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns, that completely reinvigorated both the genre and the perception of the genre. Focusing on an oral history of a Holocaust survivor, the comic covers a powerful topic and predictably won many awards, including the Pulitzer, the Eisner, and the Harvey Awards, all in 1992. I'll give you a quick overview of the story. It depicts Spiegelman interviewing his father about his experiences as a Polish Jew and Holocaust survivor. The art represents Jews as mice, Germans as cats, and Poles as pigs. It consists of two interwoven narratives, the present-day interviews and the war in the past. Much of the story revolves around Spiegelman's troubled relationship with his father and touches on many issues related to being a survivor of the events shown, including PTSD and survivor's guilt. So now, let's consider why MAUS is overrated. So point one, it feeds into and supports the pretentious idea of the graphic novel. I've mentioned this in my last video and will no doubt do so again, but the definition of a graphic novel is a comic that is larger than a conventional single issue and is originally published on a single date. Hence, Watchmen is not a graphic novel, it's a trade paperback collection, while something like Wonder Woman Hecate is a graphic novel. MAUS was serialized as an insert in Raw, an avant-garde comics and graphics magazine published by Spiegelman and his wife. A collected volume of the first 6 chapters that appeared in 1986 brought the book mainstream attention. You might sometimes see this referred to as MAUS 1, with the Roman numeral I instead of a 1. A second volume collected the remaining chapters in 1991 and is sometimes referred to as MAUS 2, again with Roman numerals instead of the number 2. However, remember that as such, this is not a graphic novel, it is a trade paperback. This can seem like a minor point, but the artificial use of the term graphic novel is something I personally really dislike for the cultural snobbery it implies. Whenever you see something referred to as a graphic novel, always remember this. It was a term specifically fabricated out of nothing in the mid-80s to convince mainstream bookshops to sell comics and to convince the casual public that they could own comics and still be considered highbrow instead of populist. It is a term that patronises the fans when used incorrectly and makes an artificial distinction within the comic genre that's actually quite regressive. Moving on to point 2, the artwork and the general quality. Not to put too fine a point on it, the artwork for MAUS is terrible. In addition, the framing, the lettering and the composition of the comic itself is all very, very poor. Let's break that down. Here you can see the art, which is almost exclusively black and white throughout. That in itself isn't a problem, many black and white comics do exist, but it does put a greater onus on the comic to have more substance to it, to compensate for this stark and minimalist choice. and it simply doesn't have that substance. The art is clunky and childish, drawn in an amateurish way. Lines are thick and scratchy, and the art lacks any subtlety, nuance, or shading. Fundamentally, the artwork looks like it came out of a webcomic, or almost as if a child had drew it. The pages themselves are incredibly text-heavy as well. Most of the scenes in MAUS have dialogue or exposition wrapped around, over, and through every image. Most speech or thought bubbles dominate the panel, filling the top in obvious, simplistic captioning that is more Silver Age than anything else. It lends a claustrophobic air to the experience of reading it, but fundamentally it does not make for an easy or a pleasant read. If one looks closely at the lettering, it's heavy and hand-drawn, irregular and uneven. On a related note, the framing of the panels is dense and repetitive, with little accommodation for the appropriate pacing of the narrative if needed. Again, the similarities to a modern webcomic and a one with lower than average production values at that are numerous. It simply is not a polished, impressive example of what Brian Michael Bendis might refer to as words with pictures. And so on to point 3. The subject matter gives this comic artificial weight. Let's look at the accolades that MAUS has accrued. The Comics Journal called it the 4th greatest comics work of the 20th century. Wizard magazine placed it first on their list of 100 greatest graphic novels. Entertainment Weekly listed MAUS at 7th place on their list of the new classics books, the 100 best reads from 1983 to 2008. Time magazine put MAUS at 7th place on their list of best non-fiction books from between 1923 and 2005, and 4th on their list of top graphic novels. However, if like me, you read MAUS and found it an unfulfilling and underwhelming experience, I'd ask you to consider this. If MAUS had been written about any other topic, literally anything else from the Cold War to an alien invasion, would it have received the same accolades? Or alternatively, put it this way, did it only get its accolades from its subject matter? And then, considering it in those terms, is it actually a good example of a Holocaust story? There have been literally hundreds of books written and films made about the same topic, and the majority are excellent. Does this comic say anything new or different? And in fact, does it say anything that couldn't have been done much better in a different medium? Now, I want to be clear here that I'm not criticising the topic or the creator. What I am saying is that if it was literally about any other topic, MAUS would have faded away into obscurity, to be forgotten almost immediately. As a comic, a marriage of words and static images, it is not a good example of that medium. This is simply something that should have been done as a book or a movie, but not as an art house comic. However, as it was an art house comic, and as it was about a politically charged topic, its actual quality ended up being really rather moot. Who cared if it was badly drawn or pretentious? It was about the Holocaust and therefore impervious to criticism. Anyone who didn't like it could be accused of anti-Semitism, of course. On top of that, it was a comic and therefore alone in its field when it came to tackling a subject area as powerful, as emotive and as tragic as this one. And so we came inevitably to the undue hype and the predictable praise heaped upon it. So in final thoughts, let's consider the impact of MAUS. Despite what you might initially think, MAUS actually had very little impact on the comic genre itself. It did not change anything to do with how comics were written, drawn or otherwise created. There's been nothing like it since, and its importance in the genre from a creative perspective is fleeting at best. However, and this is the important part, MAUS did have and continues to have to this day a huge cultural impact on the medium. It, like Watchmen before it, is a comic that made a pretentious literary elite sit up and start taking comics seriously, albeit for the wrong reasons. It hugely helped popularise the term graphic novel, inaccurately as I've said, and therefore encouraged high street bookshops to view comics as a legitimate literary medium that they could stock on the shelves. I think it's fair to say that if it wasn't for MAUS, the comic industry would be several huge strides behind where it is today. So what should you do? Well, you should definitely read it. Your library will have a copy, I have no doubt of that, and your friends will probably have a copy on their shelf somewhere. Like Watchmen, this is one of those comics that people with no interest in comics are still likely to have on their shelves, as it offers them a starting point for a fashionable conversation about literature and graphic novels. And I think it's important for anyone who wants to get into comics to read it and see what the fuss is all about for themselves, to make up their own mind. But please, don't feel obliged to like it just because other people say you should. So that's it from me. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, please like, comment, subscribe, and share more widely. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on MAUS and on this series of videos in general. What other overhyped comics do you think people are afraid to say they don't like? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, these videos are only possible thanks to supporting this channel by heading over to Amazon.com and picking up the first episode of my prose novel about superheroes, No Gods or Kings, available for less than $1. Until next time, stay classy.